So making a windrows is a fairly straightforward process. You load up your libraries in RStudio, you read your Excel file. It looks like this. This is what I have right now. This is just taken from this Excel sheet here. Then you fire up your windrows function. That's a part of the OpenAir package. You tell it which data set to use. You tell it which columns represent your wind direction and wind speed. And if you prefer, you can turn paddles off. That gives you this sort of windrows, which I quite prefer. But if you want to make a pollution rows, that's also just as straightforward. We're going to use a different function. So instead of windrows, we'll replace this with pollution rows. The my data argument will stay, and so will WD and WS. You don't need the paddle argument here because pollution roses by default already have that turned off. You will need the pollutant argument though, and this is to tell the pollution rows function which column to use as your pollutant. And if we look at our data set, we have quite a few to choose from. We could choose NO, NO2, O3, carbon monoxide, or maybe one of the BTEX compounds. But let's keep it simple. Let's go with nitrogen oxide. I have to give it the full column name, so that's going to be NO, and I have to include the PPB in brackets because that's technically a part of the column's name, the header. And this, when you run this, you should get a nice pollution rows. There it is. You can see the OpenAir package automatically selects a scale and a default color scheme. This is the key. You can see the key label here. And of course, just like the windrows diagram, there's a lot of customizability here. If you go into the console and you write pollution rows, you'll see there are a bunch of arguments you can play with to fine-tune how your pollution rows works and what it looks like. So that's a pollution rows. You can also make a polarPlot, which is something a little bit different. So when you have a windrows or a pollution rows, your radial axis, this 20%, 40%, 60% that you see here, this radial axis represents the frequency of counts by wind direction. Now, a polarPlot, on the other hand, changes the radial axis to represent wind speed. So you can see how concentration of your pollutant changes with different wind speeds in different directions. So to make a polarPlot, we're just going to change our function to polarPlot. Again, my data will remain, so will WD and WS, and you'll still be providing it with a pollutant. And if we run this, error in check prep, can't find the variable WS. That's a little bit funny. I've specified to you what to use as WS. Okay. I'm not sure. So again, when you run into this, again, I haven't used this in a bit, so I can always just double check $polarPlot. Let's see if I missed something. Oh, you can see they don't use the WS argument. I guess they use the X argument. That's a little bit funny. Did they change that? It wasn't like that before. But see, this is why you use the help tab. So instead of WS, I guess I'll make this small x. Let's see if this works now. And there you go. So that must have been a recent change. But now you can see this is our polarPlot. And on our radial axis, we have our wind speed, which if we look at our data sheet, this is in meters per second. Speed, this is in meters per second. I don't think I have the label here. but I know for a fact that it is meters per second. And you can see how the concentration of our nitrogen oxide changes in winds of different speed. So at 2 meters per second, at 4, and at 6. One more thing that you might be wondering is, why is most of the plot empty? Why is this quarter and this empty? Well, why isn't it also filled up with colors? Well, that's because our data set is very small, and it doesn't actually contain data for winds from those directions. So, of course, when we plot the data set, we have no data, and that's why these 3 quarters are empty. But that's how you make a polar plot and a pollution rose in RStudio. It's very straightforward, very simple, and I think the visuals are quite appealing.